So thanks to everyone who has joined live today. And I know there's plenty of people watching the recording. So hello to future people. So my name is Arthur Moore, and I'm going to be talking today about asking great questions as a tutor and some small changes you can make to have a big impact on your tutoring. So just a bit of background on me first. So my name is Arthur. I used to be a secondary maths teacher. That's kind of my trade. And I've been a full-time tutor now for 3 years. And I mainly work with kind of one-to-one and small groups. I have done big groups as well. So that's kind of my kind of background. And one thing I'm really passionate about is pedagogy. How can we all teach better to our students? And even building on that, one thing I'm really passionate about is these little changes we can make that make a big difference to our students. So what I'm aiming to talk to about today is helping you improve your questioning strategies just by making some small changes to what you're already doing. As educators, you are all already asking great questions all the time. And what I'm trying to do is just make these tiny little changes that can make this even better. And the reason I wanted to focus on questioning is I really do believe that questioning is at the absolute core of what we do as educators. When that's working with students, we all know that when you ask that great question that gets a student in or gets them interested, it really helps them kind of engage with the topic, the subject, but also engage with the learning. If we take the learning away kind of the topic, and that's why I think questioning is super important. The other reason I think it's really important is we have so much control over the questions we ask in our sessions, because we are asking those questions quite often because we are what we would call the expert. So we're the expert, the learner is the novice, and we kind of got that dynamic. This is something I've always been really passionate about, whether it was as a teacher and now as a tutor. So this is kind of what we're going to be focusing on today. We're going to start with a bit of kind of self-reflection. So what I want you to do just by yourself is just take a moment to ask yourself what you think makes a great question. I'm not talking about in your subject, in tutoring in general. I just want you asking to yourself what you think makes a great question. I'll just give you a moment to kind of reflect upon that by yourself. And I'm going to slightly change that question now. I'm now going to ask you what you think makes a great question in your tutoring sessions. So you've all got something in your mind about what makes a great question. And now I want you to slightly flip that and ask what makes a great session in your sessions. The word "your" there is really important, not just a session, your session. So just take a moment to reflect upon that. Okay, I'm deliberately not going to ask people to share their answer there. I know normally we would have a nice discussion about this, but this was a really personal to you. What is asking you to make a great question in your subject? So now what I want you to think about, we're going away from a question, and I now want you adding the word strategy to that, because this is what we're going to be focusing on for some time today. So what makes a great questioning strategy? I've added the word strategy there. So we've gone from a great question in your lesson. Now we're asking a great questioning strategy. Again, just take a moment to reflect upon how you work. So I think it's important here what I kind of mean by strategy. So what I mean by strategy, I'm not talking about individual questions. I'm talking about a plan that we have designed to achieve an aim. So this is not just asking questions off the cuff, which we do all the time as educators. This is not just thinking, oh, this will work right in this moment. It's actually taking a step back and thinking about a strategy you can implement in your sessions. And what we're going to talk about is the 4 kind of aspects of a question. And we're going to talk about how within each of those aspects, you can make these small changes to just top up your question even more. So I'm going to talk about the 4 steps, and I class those 4 steps as framing the question, asking the question, the student thinking about the question, and then the actual answers themselves. So this is not just I ask a question, you give an answer. I'm going to break it down even more there. And this is what I mean by a strategy. I'm thinking about my question in terms of 4 different aspects, and I'm going to think about each of those to come up with a whole strategy. So what we're now going to do is go through those 4 bits of the question and kind of think about how we can now think about a question strategy. So if we first think about framing the question, and framing the question is very literally what it sounds like. I've got my question, but I need to think about the structure I'm giving around that question, mainly to ask, does the student know what I want them to be thinking about? When I ask a question in a session, I often have an end goal with this question. I want the student thinking about this bit of the maths question. I want them thinking about this line of the poetry. I want them thinking about this image they're seeing and how it makes them feel. I want them thinking about what technique they're using in PE. But if I don't word the question in such a way that the student knows that's what I want them to be thinking about, they might go off and think about something entirely different, or they might not register the question in something to do with them and think about TikTok or think about what they're going to have for lunch. So framing the question just means, am I giving the question structure in how I articulate it? So the student is straight away going, I know what I need to do with that bit of information. And that's really, really important. We know how the brain works, that it can't kind of jump around and do these multiple things. Multitasking doesn't actually exist. It doesn't exist. So what we're trying to do is give the student a very specific task within the question to say, this is what I want you thinking about. And some examples of that are by saying, in a moment, I'm going to ask you a question about. It's a really simple phrase, that, but this is not just me asking the question, which I've managed to spell question wrong, which is never a good sign. Maybe that's the question I'm going to ask here. What is the question? What's wrong with this question? So if we break this part down into 3 parts, in a moment, so the student is already thinking, right, at the end of this sentence, I'm going to have something to think about. That means to me that this sentence is important. I need to be focusing on this question. I'm going to ask you a question. Okay, well, that means the teacher is going to be asking me to do something. So at the end of this sentence, the teacher is going to be asking me to do something. So when they say about, I've got their focus. I've always structured and framed the question in a way that the student already knows, before I've even asked the question, that this is something they need to be engaging in. And if you think about it, if you just asked the question, if you took away this kind of starter and just asked the question, well, the first few words, the student might not have even been switched on. And I'm not saying they're not engaged with your session, but their eyes might have been caught over there. They might be looking at a poster in your room. They might have noticed that their glass of water is empty and they're actually thirsty. But they hear, in a moment, I'm switched on. I'm going to ask you a question. I'm engaged about, I'm already listening. So I'm not going to miss the question because I'm already there. The frame has been put there. I can now focus on the canvas. And I think this is such a powerful thing you do. It's a really small change you can make a really big impact. What you can also do is we can look at something and then I'm going to ask you some questions. So, for example, I might say, Nicola, in a moment, we're going to watch a video and then I'm going to ask you some questions. What that tells Nicola is we're not just watching a video. There's going to be an action from this video. And that is already telling Nicola's brain she needs to engage with what she is about to see, what she's about to read, what she's about to do. If you think about your subject area, which is why I was getting you to think about that beforehand, we can do. So I do this a lot in maths. I say, look at this diagram, and then I'm going to ask you some questions. Again, it's putting the frame around the question so the student can think, right, I've actually got to look at this diagram. What might Arthur ask a question about? He might be asking a question about the angle, so I need to focus on that. Or you might be asking about this table. You might be doing something about poetry. Right, we're going to read the first paragraph, and then I'm going to ask you some questions about it. So the student already has that buy-in. We're telling them very clearly there's going to be a consequence action to what we're about to do. So it's not just read the first paragraph, of which even subconscious they might be, we're just going to read it, and then we're going to do something else. No, I'm going to ask some questions. I'm already engaged before I go into the task. So you can see what I mean here by framing the question. I'm putting that structure before I've even asked the question. We're not focusing on the question at all here. We're focusing on getting the student to be like, yes, I'm in, I'm focusing. And this can be with students who aren't focused, but also with students who are really engaged and focused in your subject. They're already going to be thinking ahead of what they need to do, which is brilliant. And if you think even taking this further to kind of exam skills, you get them thinking about what the examiner is wanting them to see before they go about the question. We never just say, do a load of writing and hope the examiner you've answered the question. No, we think about the question. One of my favorites is, in 2 minutes, I'm going to ask you to explain. So this is another framing of the question. So we've done something, we've done an activity, we've done a task, and I say, John, in 2 minutes, I'm going to ask you to explain this. I haven't even asked the question, but John now knows he's got a time frame. He's subconsciously put on the ticking clock, so he knows what he's doing. And I've said the word explain. So I'm not saying show. I'm not asking him to do something. I'm not asking him to give me an answer. So John goes, right, I've got these 2 minutes to come up with an explanation. Again, I'm not even asking the question, and I've given structure to what I want my student to be doing. This is why I think questioning is so, so important. These are 3 little sentence starters there, or sentence structures, that will just make a tiny difference to your questioning, get your student to maybe engage half a second earlier. And that half a second is a lot of time for the brain to do a lot of really clever stuff. Right, now we can actually talk about asking the question. So we've kind of framed the question, we've given it structure, but does the student know what is going to happen? Do they actually understand what the question is about? So again, we'll look at a couple of examples of this. So remember when you answer to. So I've asked my question. I'm not telling you what makes a great question in your topic, your subject area. You are the experts there. But if I were to say, well, here's a question. Now, remember when you answer this to include some key mathematical language. Now, remember when you answer this question, remember that I want to get what the author was trying to do. Remember when you answer this question that I want some key dates to reflect why you're saying this. By saying remember to answer, or saying think about your answer, again, I'm giving that student the structure to think about the answer. I'm very clearly signposting, this is what I want you to do. Now, you might not do this much straight away. You might say, right, here's the question. In a couple of minutes, I'm going to be asking you to explain the answer here. Now, remember when you explain the answer to include some key words, or include what character you're talking about, or include some adjectives. Whatever level you're working with, this is going to work. I can structure the question. So I'm now framing the question and then even giving even more focus to the student. This is how I want you to be answering it. And I'm sure you can already think about how this might work with students who are in primary school, secondary school, further education. It's a really powerful way to do this. We say this a lot when we're working with students in a non-kind of academic way. You think about, for those who have worked in schools, I want you to get ready for class. Remember, to be ready for class, you need your pen and pencil out. We say this a lot, so let's do it when we're asking questions to do with knowledge as well. One of my favorites. So this is the same question. Arthur, what is the denominator? What is the denominator, Arthur? Now, the second one is the one I really want to focus on. And this is a really good tip if you're working with groups. If you're tutoring with big groups or even small groups or even 2 students. I've done this already a couple of times to kind of give an example. If I put the name at the front, everyone else goes, not me. Oh, it's not going to be me. I don't need to worry about this. What a great day. I don't need to know what the denominator is. But if I ask the question and leave the name at the end, everyone is engaged with the question. So if I say, Arthur, what's the denominator? Only Arthur is going to listen to that question. Even if there's an awesome student, on some level, they're going to go, oh, this isn't coming to me. But if I say, what is the denominator? Arthur, you've all had time to come up with an answer. This is a factual recall, so it's a really quick bit of information. So if I was asking it to this group, I might say, what is the denominator? Sam, what do you think? Everyone has come up with an answer. So even if they're not now explaining their answer, they've still engaged with the learning. They are thinking about what you want them to think about. And that's where learning occurs. Learning doesn't occur by us asking questions. Learning occurs by getting the student to think about something. That's where the learning happens. So make sure all your students are thinking all the time, not going, oh, it's not me asking about what the denominator is. We're now going to move on to the third aspect, which is thinking time, which is my absolute, if we had to go even further in on my favorite thing in education, this is it. Thinking time. Thinking, by what I mean by thinking time is the time between you asking the question and getting a response. How long are you going to give them? Now, typically, the average teacher, which is for a response, is about 1 second. So question, answer. Question, answer. Now, if you think about what the student's got to do in that second, they've got to actually hear the question. They've actually got to understand what you've said. So they've actually got to process the words that you have said. They've got to understand what the question actually is. So they've heard the words, they've processed the words. Now they think about what they've actually got to think about. They've then got to go back into their long-term memory and retrieve the information they need to answer the question. They've got to think about how that retrieved information matches with the answer or the question. They've got to formulate an answer, and they've got ready to get ready to explain it. And they've got to do that in 1 second. That is not anywhere near enough time to do this. Now, the reason we think this happens in teaching, in schools, or in tutoring is because we're a bit scared of silence. I know I definitely was at the start of my teaching career, but definitely at the start of my tutoring career, was I'm scared of silence, because if silence is happening, that means no one's doing anything. It means we're just sitting in silence. But silence is absolutely important, because that's where we do our thinking. That's where we can come up with the answers. I know I speak quite quickly. I know I say a lot of words, but if I spoke continuously for the whole time here and didn't give you any time to think about anything, you wouldn't be taken out of this session, because all you'd be doing is processing everything I'm saying. Whereas if I slow down and actually say something and give you thinking time, you'll notice I did that at the start of the session. We kind of embraced the silence. We had a bit of silent time. And that's because what we really want to do is give 3 seconds. That's the absolute minimum of what we want to do. We absolutely want to give longer if this is a really complex answer, but we consciously want to give our students 3 seconds. And some top tips that you can do around there to give those 3 seconds, because this is hard. This is hard to do. One thing you could do is, one of my favorites, I used to do this at the start of my teaching career, is literally tap out those 3 seconds. So I'd ask a question. Right, I'm ready to answer. I might just tap. You don't have to tap loud. You don't have to do the, you don't have to have a big timer going off. You can literally just sit there and go, right, here's the answer. But I'm consciously giving those 3 seconds at least, even if I'm just waiting for factual recall. And even if you're working in groups, it's really important that you embrace that silence so everyone is thinking and therefore engaging with the learning. So really think about 3 seconds. A really great thing to do here is when you record your online tutoring, which I'm sure everyone is doing, if you watch back over those sessions, those 3 seconds, watch if you're doing this. There's so often when you are saying stuff and not giving that time frame. Best thing I ever did as a teacher in the early bit of my career was to record myself teaching. And I noticed that I literally never stopped talking. I was scared of silence. And my students never had a chance to think in silence. And that's a really important aspect to this. And finally, coming on to the kind of the fourth bit, is actually getting the answers. So we framed our question. We've structured the question in a way that everyone knows what they are doing. I've given the students enough thinking time to actually engage with the topic, the thing I'm trying to think about. And now I want answers. I've done all the groundwork. Hopefully there's some brilliant answers out there. And normally the answers come down to, who am I going to ask? Why am I asking them? And how am I going to ask them for their answers? So one thing we spoke about earlier, this links back to what we spoke about earlier. So I've asked a question. If I now say, Ayushi, will you share any thoughts? Again, I'm putting the focus straight in on Ayushi. And also, if you think about at the end of the question ends and Ayushi is expected to give an answer. Whereas if I structure at the end, can you share your thoughts? Everyone has time to go, right, Arthur might be about to ask me. I need to come up with an answer. What was that answer I thought of? Yeah, that's it. Does that make sense? Right, Ayushi, can you explain your answer? Ayushi's then ready to go. If I put the name at the start it puts pressure on her usually. She's got to listen to the question and then jump in. And also everyone else is just, they're not probably listening to her usually. What they're thinking is, it wasn't me. It wasn't me. That's really good. And even if you've got students who are super, super engaged, trust me, that's what they're thinking. You could be teaching students who are going to Oxbridge, and when they first hear it's not going to be them, their first thought is, glad it wasn't me. Even if they had a great answer ready to go. Another way I can engage with the class with my answers, and this is great if you're working with small groups, or if you're working in person with groups. Watch what I'm going to do here. So I've asked my question. Arthur's given me a response. Arthur said the denominator is the biggest number. Explain to me what you think of that answer, John. And what I'm doing there, Arthur said the denominator is the biggest number. All my students are now thinking about that. They've heard that answer. Even if they didn't listen to Arthur, they've now got me saying it again. So they've heard it. I've given them thinking time to think about what has Arthur said. Is that correct? Why do I think it's correct? Was it wrong? Why do I think it's wrong? What do I think? I've then said, explain to me. So I'm being very clear of what I want them to do. What you think of that answer. So I'm not saying, do you think that answer was right? Do you think that was wrong? Explain to me why Arthur's wrong. Explain to me why Arthur got that wrong. Explain to me what you think of that answer. I'm leaving it open-ended. I'm not already telling Arthur that he's got this wrong. I'm not doing a big point saying Arthur's got this wrong. We are all going to explain why he is wrong, even though probably a lot of you are thinking that all the time. And then I paused. Everyone's now thinking of that. And then I asked the person's name. And this is what I mean by a question strategy. We all ask these questions. I've seen lots of tutors. I've spoken to lots of tutors. I've seen loads of teaching. We all do these really good questions. But I'm structuring it in a way that allows the whole group to be engaging with the question, the whole group to be thinking about the question, the whole group ready to give an answer, and then I'm actually getting the answer. And this is a really nice way of what we would call pose, pause, pounce, bounce. So you pose a question, you get an answer from someone, call that pouncing. You pause, and then you bounce that to the next person. And then you can keep doing this. So John might say, I think Arthur was wrong. The denominator is the smallest number. I go, right. John says the denominator is always the smallest number. What do we think of that answer? Sam, what do you think? And I'm bouncing it around. And I've taken a really simple topic there, and it works brilliant with these simple topics. But you can also do this with much bigger answers. Right, so someone's written a piece of work and we've got that on the board. Right, I want everyone to look at this, and I want them to explain to me 2 things that Ayushi has done really well with this bit of work. Everyone's thinking about that. Right, what do you think about that bit of work? What was good about it? Excellent. Right, anyone else want something to add on that? You can see how that conversation starts to go. And these are, as I said, these are all questions you are all asking all the time. But I just want you to think about how you can slightly change the way you are asking these to create a strategy to get the best answer possible. So we spoke about 4 different aspects there of question. We spoke about framing the question, which was all about giving structure to the question before we've even asked the question. Actually asking the question, am I making it very clear to my students what I want them to be doing? Am I giving them enough thinking time to be able to come back with a good answer? At least looking for 3 seconds there to give them time. 1 second takes longer to change 4 wheels on a Formula 1 car. We don't want to be giving students less time than that. That's a genuine study that goes around and it's repeated it again and again in literature. Everywhere in the world, it comes up again and again. And then the actual answers. What can I do with the answers? What can I do with the answers here? If you want to kind of push your tutor, if you've listened to everything I've said and said, well, I'm already doing that. I'm already doing all this stuff. So I'm already brilliant at question. You can start to build in a loop here. So I get the answers and then I go back to the thinking stage. So someone's given me a really good answer. And as a tutor here, what we tend to do is jump in on an answer. Someone says something, we go, oh, that's brilliant. Here's why that answer was brilliant. I'm really excited about that. I'm so glad someone said this. And what I haven't done there is given everyone else who didn't have that answer the thinking time to process what has been said. So I get my answers. I can go back to the thinking stage and give everyone thinking time, including myself, time to think about the brilliant answer I just heard and how to come back with that. I don't know how everyone else is, but quite often, especially when I'm teaching A-level maths, for example, someone says something that I think was a brilliant answer, and I jump in before I've actually given myself time to really think about how I'm going to say what I want to say in a really well-structured way. So I go, oh, that was brilliant. Adam, I'm so happy you did that. I really like the way you like the way you said the thing you said was really good. I really like that. I haven't given Adam anything there. All I've said is well done. Whereas if I said, give myself a bit of pause. Well done, Adam. I really like the fact that you focused on the differential aspect on this before you went on to the next aspect. I'm not just signposting to Adam that you got it right. I'm signposting him why I think this is a great way for him to answer the question. And you can then, I'm not going to keep going for this, but you can think about how these can all link back. So I get an answer. I then go back to thinking time. I frame my own answer to the question I've asked. I then can think about how I'm giving that explanation, another way of asking a question, thinking, and then we're building in a discussion. And the more you practice this, the more you go over this with your students, you'll just start doing it subconsciously. And that's when your questioning strategy really takes off, because you stop thinking about the strategy that you're doing to be questioned, and you have more space to think about the questions you are asking. If you notice one thing I did today, I really tried to not focus on the actual questions. I'm not a science expert. I'm not a primary expert. I'm not an expert in tutoring art. You are the experts in those. You're the expert in those sessions with your students. You know what you're looking for those students. You know what you want them thinking about. What I want you thinking about today is how you can build a question strategy to support the great questions you are going to ask. So I was hoping at the end of this session to improve your question strategy via some small changes. So before we go into answering any questions you may have, what I want to do is everyone just to take a moment. And what I want you to do is I want you to think about the session we just had. I want you to think about one change that you're going to take from this that you think can help improve your question strategy. If you can, I would like you to write it down. So I want you to take a moment to think about the question strategy, and I want you to write it down. So for example, you might say, one thing I'm going to try and improve my question strategy is. So I'm just wanting to take a moment. If you're watching a recording, you can pause it, take some time. Take a little time to reflect and write that down. And finally, from that, so hopefully you've got something written down. I want to do this. I want to try and do this. What I want you to do is now write when you're going to try that. Are you going to try that in a session today? Do you need to give yourself some more time to reflect upon it and do it next week? Is this something you want to come back to and try and implement next month? And then that little note you've written to yourself, take a picture of it, set a reminder on your phone, put it on your notice board, put it under your keypad so it appears at some other point. And next time you're asking questions to your students, if you can make one small change, you'll start to see real changes in the answers you are able to get from your students. So thank you for that. If anyone has any questions, please let me know. If anyone's got any questions, please jump in there. If not, I will do a very quick plug for a couple of things. But if not, if anyone's got any questions, please feel free to ask me now. If you're watching on catch up and you've got any questions, please feel free to get in contact.
What are the best contact details for you, Arthur?
I'm so pleased you asked that, John. Best way to get in contact with me is probably on LinkedIn. So if you type Arthur Moore Tutor on LinkedIn, you will find me there. That's probably the best way to get in contact with me. That's where I seem to live most. Where is it? I don't even have it written down. On LinkedIn. I couldn't hear you there,
so it's M-O-O-R-E, right?
M-O-O-R-E, yes, double O. Not more as in, oh, can we do some more maths? I've heard it before. Not Arthur, it's in Harther. Like, oh, sir, you'll sound like half of six. Heard it all before.
Yeah.
It's all very funny. Ha, ha, ha. It's funny for about first year. if you kind of want to learn more about me in a couple of ways, there's a few other things I'm doing. So the main thing I do is I do a podcast called Tutoring Tips, where top tutors from around the world share top tutoring tip, and they are less than 2 minutes long. So one came out yesterday from John, who's on the call. Nicola, who was on the call previously, has also shared one. And that's out every week, where you get a top tutor sharing a top tip, which is getting you thinking about your tutoring from a session perspective. I also do, you can record your own session. So you can go to Tutoring Tips. If you listen to podcasts, it's all in the episode notes. But you can also go on there and record your own tip and share that with tutors worldwide. It's listened to in over 50 countries. So you can share a tip, and then that's listened to by loads of people. The other thing I'm going to plug, mainly because I've got a discount code for everyone who's watching this, I'm starting something called Navigated Tutor, which is going to be all focused around your development as a teacher, as an educator, but in your world of tutoring. The way that's going to look is it's going to be a quarterly magazine and webinar. The magazine is going to be focused on one aspect of education, and then the webinar, we're going to have a guest expert on that webinar to talk you through some more techniques to answer your questions. And if you put navigated, I'll put the code in, but if you put in Navigated Tutor and put Navigated Spotlight, then what you'll do is you'll get 25% off that, and there's 10 spots for people watching this. There is the link in the chat, or you can find all my stuff on LinkedIn, as I said. But that's me going to be talking about even more about education and kind of really trying to develop us as teachers, which is going to make a huge difference to our students, which is what this is all about. And then if you want some bigger conversations about education in general, I also run a podcast called TandTeaching, where I talk with some educators from around the world about teaching, about education, about how it all links up. But if you come and find me on LinkedIn, that's the best way to find me. But if anyone has any questions, please do ask about questions. Always happy to answer questions about questioning.
Well, no, first thing I want to say is thanks very much, Arthur. I thought it was really, really insightful. You obviously know your stuff about questioning, and there's even a few things there that I'd heard of, like pose, pause, pounce, but not bounce really on the end of it. So that's a new one for me. But no, really, really found it very useful, actually. Really interesting. I mean, I have to write and ask a lot of questions of students these days. So I found it really interesting. So thanks very much.
No, thank you very much for having me.
Any other questions? No, not so far. Very, very clear. Yeah, I thought it was really interesting. I did actually think of a question earlier that I now has escaped my mind. I didn't get a chance to note it down, so I'm sure I'll come back to you in the near future and chase you up when I've remembered what it was.
You know, John, I'm always happy to chat education. So anyone watching this, please feel free to just throw a question at me, and I will either say the answer or I will say I don't know, but I will go away and find the answer.
Oh, I remembered what it was actually. It was about the data on. I was amazed. Did you have a source for it that people only wait 1 second for a question?
Being replicated across multiple studies, in multiple scenarios, in multiple environments.
Yeah,
it's one of those things that kind of we keep coming back to. I think it was first done by Mary Rowe in the 80s, and it's been replicated.
Oh wow!
Since. Yeah,
no, it's interesting because I've not heard the specific data, and I've not seen the specific studies that do it. But that's a really interesting point, and I've seen it hundreds of times before. That people think if they're not talking, that they're not providing value or something, or they're not doing their job properly. And it's like, hang on a minute, you can just.
I think it's really hard in tutoring, especially when you're like, you might have a parent in the background of a screen or at the kitchen table or something like that. You feel like you have to add value by talk, because that's my job. But you're not a speaker. It's not like, oh, you employ me to lecture to your student for an hour. No, you're employing me to teach them. And part of teaching is thinking.
Yeah, and I really, really agreed with that, because I think a lot of there's a big element of that tutors need to have a lot of professional confidence to be able to justify why they choose to do certain things, especially if they choose to do things which are maybe counterintuitive in a way. I mean, it's not even that counterintuitive. I completely see what you're talking about. I mean, you obviously want the students to think, right? But it is that idea that if you're not actually doing anything, if there's no actual activity or noise going on, that somehow maybe the parent might say, oh, what are you doing? Are you just sitting there doing nothing? Obviously you're not. You've asked them a question, they're thinking about the answer, but it's having that professional confidence to be able to say, I don't have to justify it, because they won't question me waiting 3 seconds for an answer. Number one.
I do all my tutoring online, and I was always worried at the start that a parent would walk in or walk past the screen, and all they do is they see the student sitting there in silence and me sitting there in silence, and they'd be like, well, what's going on here? Whereas I'd be like, well, we're actually thinking. And like, it's so important to like, you have to be really conscious with that. I think we want to fill the silence. You have to be really conscious sometimes to not fill it.
Definitely. And I actually have sorry, I'm taking up a lot of the time, but there was an interesting anecdote years and years ago, about 10 years ago now, where someone came in, a mum came in just after I'd asked a question to a student, and she asked some sort of question, but I didn't respond to her straight away because I could see the student was literally on the tip of his tongue, was trying to think of the answer, and I really, really wanted him to get it. So I had to talk to the mum after and say, look, I'm sorry, I wasn't trying to ignore you. I was just literally wanted them to answer this question. You literally opened the door exactly the wrong moment. But it is about having that you have to have some element of personal, professional confidence to say, actually, no, I'm going to wait and just not intervene.
And that's why I think discussions like the one we've had today and the one you did with your, like, actually understanding the process of learning and how it works, it gives you that confidence, because you're not just saying, I'm not just like, it's not just, oh, I think silence is good. I think silence is good because I know it works from these studies. So that's why, like, part of the navigator that I'll do is looking at the latest research in academia and like how that can help us. And that always kind of, it really helps us kind of give us the confidence to do more stuff, like to do with multiple choice questioning, or when we want to do some retrieval practice or different techniques we want to try. It's always nice to know someone else has tried it and it worked before.
Yeah, that it's something that other people are doing, not just, this is not just me coming up with an idea and the parent might go, well, nobody else does that, or anything like that. No, definitely. Thanks very much, Arthur. Really, really appreciate it. And I think it's really a really valuable session as well.
No, well, thank you for having me. Thank you for having me, TTA. No, pleasure as always.
Look forward to having you back in the not too distant future. And
no doubt.
Yeah. Really, really appreciate it. Thanks so much, Arthur. Thanks guys for attending as well. And thanks to all of those of you who are watching online after the event. And yeah, look forward to catching up with you all again soon.